This episode is brought to you by Mayfell. Guys, are you still matching for that perfect pair of jeans? Well, your search is over. Mayfell jeans look fresh and feel worn in, like a pattern forever. Mayfell's team of denim experts keep count on the details, perfecting each and every fit and sourcing sustainable fabric from the world's finest mills. So don't wait to upgrade your denim fit. Go to Mayfell.com today and get 20% off your purchase using the code Spotify20. Very lots. Mayfell.com. I promo for all for details.
All right, let's start to see it. Front of me, your call out.
Yeah. So I should, we got about 2 minutes. And when it comes down to whenever you're ready.
We have to start at 6:30 since that's how we have the time.
Yes, sir.
All right, my clock says 6:30, so Mike just left. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order at 6:30. First up on the agenda, and there's what I just did. Second up is roll call.
Okay, I can do that. Steve Ruyle.
Here.
Lou Savage is absent. Sean Fitzgerald.
Present.
And Chairman Ryan Jones.
Here.
Okay.
Let's see, approval of the May 9th, 2022 meeting minutes. Any adjustments or things that we look out of place on that? I think the motion is approved and when anybody's ready. Motion to approve. More minutes. Last meeting, which is almost Steve, you got a second since you're the only other one here.
I second.
Properly moved and seconded to approve the minutes from last meeting. All those.
Aye.
Motion carries. I should do that for Ken. Let's see. Okay, item number 4, comments from citizens. This is the time for anyone to address the planning commission on matters that are not on the agenda.
Say anything?
I'm just here to observe. I'll try to conversation, maybe the council. I have not quite, so, okay, I'm here to everybody. Okay, so on item 5, new business, update of the city's development code for psilocybin.
Okay, that would be me. So what transpired is that the make this really quick, the state passed a measure that basically allows for the use of psilocybin within the state, and then it delegated down the restrictions to the county and municipal levels. So the city council saw that and decided that they wanted to put onto the ballot in November a measure to put a 2-year moratorium on psilocybin within the city limits of Amity for 2 years. And in doing so, it gives the city planning commission 2 years, hopefully, if the measure passes, to revise the Amity development codes prior to the establishment of psilocybin within the community. So what we did is kind of looked at what the city of Dayton and some other communities had come up with as far as restricting both marijuana and their proposed recommendations for psilocybin. And we're recommending that we go through that same process for the city of Amity as directed by the city council for ourselves. So you can see there on my second page that there's things to consider is that within 3 to 5 years, the middle school will vacate its current location, opening up some properties to commercial marijuana and psilocybin operations. The middle school area is currently zoned R2, which is medium density residential. Yes, within 1,000 feet of the light industrial commercial zones, which are psilocybin allowed. It would be beneficial to incorporate marijuana and psilocybin in the same prohibition and restrictions, knowing full well that because of cannabis, it'd be to we would have to grandfather in them, and there's no tax revenue. So there is a 1,000-foot buffer allowed. So the plan right now is for you guys to go through the process of amending the code to prohibit the manufacture or just the servicing of psilocybin within 1,000 feet of where children under individuals under the age of 18 gather, which includes schools, libraries, parks, and daycares. And so that's kind of what we're hoping you guys will start that process, hopefully with the next meeting. Any questions? And Holly, did I miss anything there?
No, I think you nailed it. You know, cities all over the state right now are having this conversation. So Amity certainly doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. There are plenty of examples we can pull from.
The idea being if this measure passes on the November 8th ballot, that gives us 2 years to go through this process. If it fails, psilocybin will be allowed come January 1st, 2023, and we would be making up the rules as people were basically applying for permits and allowing and getting their businesses established. So hopefully the measure will pass, and then that will give us some breathing space to put some rules into place that will allow for cannabis, but then maybe restrict future operations within those that described 1,000-foot bubble. So I don't think there's any real steps we have to take today, unless it's mainly just kind of giving you the heads up and then questions and seek any clarifications you may have.
Can we make it more than 1,000 feet?
Holly can back me up on this one. I believe you can. You may have some legal issues with that, since the state only allows you up to 1,000 feet. And if you included both psilocybin and marijuana in there, we could be potentially doing a backdoor prohibition, which would be A, illegal for the psilocybin, and B, would eliminate our ability to get tax revenue for the marijuana. So
Yeah, something we learned when cannabis first started talking to the city, we had our GIS person do a map, and it was a 1,000-foot buffer around those school properties. And you'll remember that at that time, there was only one commercial property in the entire city that wasn't covered by that buffer. And that's how Amity was able to say that it wasn't an outright prohibition, and Amity could continue to receive the tax revenue from marijuana sales throughout the state. And so when we go through this process, we'll have our GIS person do those buffers, and we'll look at how many properties are available to make sure we're not outright prohibiting it. But I do understand the community's concerns that it needs to be restrictive. So we'll work through the mapping process.
the main concern that council and myself and Holly kind of noted would be that now that the school bond is passed, the southern bubble, that 1,000-foot bubble, will go away within 3 to 5 years, opening up most of the south end of town to potential dispensaries for marijuana and or psilocybin use. So, which would be either servicing or manufacturing. So the thought process would be parks, places where children's congregate, libraries, etc., would at 1,000-foot may be enough to cover the majority of that space under other limits. Well, like Holly said, not putting a total ban. So that's kind of the intent.
I'm okay with the total ban, but that's just my opinion, so.
Well, to be honest with you, there were some council members that were also up for a 2-year ban, but our choices in front of our choices were basically to put this up to the voters, and when that came about, the council basically decided we put in a prohibition since the state law had already passed, and then we'd give ourselves that 2 years to kind of figure it all out. Hopefully, we'll see.
One thing, I'm sorry.
The state measure is for therapeutic use, right? We're not talking about like recreational use of psilocybin, right? We're talking about like controlled therapeutic.
Yes, so there are three categories. It's the manufacture, the distribution, and the servicing. The ones we as a city can control are the manufacturer and the servicing. Servicing basically has to be a licensed therapist in a controlled setting with ration doses under supervision, controlled form, etc. The issue there that some people have complained about is that the licensed therapist is basically, you have a GED and like 20 hours of training and you're considered a licensed therapist to give psilocybin. So that was one of the interesting caveats there, but it would not be like Cannabros where they could just really sell it. It has to be under supervision. The thought process would be that, and we had this discussion, that theoretically Cannabros could establish themselves, and if we don't have this prohibition or any rules in, they could then set up some sort of space in their establishment that would then allow them to do that servicing of psilocybin within their current establishment. And there was some concern that we shouldn't let that happen, but we don't have any rules against it. So something maybe they wanted to discuss was to maybe put that in the development code and then kind of roll that all together. But you also have the choice of only restricting psilocybin to this new rule and then leaving marijuana as it is, or it's kind of how you guys want to go forward and put it all together and then present it to council. I hope that makes sense.
That was a really good question about the different types of activities. For marijuana, I believe there are 5 different activities. And then there's also industrial hemp, which is regulated under a different agency in different ways. So, you know, the 1,000 foot buffer might apply to retail, but it might not apply to other activities. So I think we need to be thoughtful about each of those activities and how it fits in your community.
As it currently stands, the code in Amity prohibits all 5 cannabis activities.
Amity doesn't actually have any marijuana code currently. They default to the state rules, and that's 1,000 foot buffer from schools.
All 5 activities.
For retail.
The ORS is actually in the agenda packet, and I'll read it. It says, licensed premises restrictions requirements. The licensed premises of a retailer may not be located except as provided by ORS 475 Bravo.109 within 1,000 feet of a public elementary or secondary school, which attendance is compulsory, private or parochial elementary school, or is a zone that is exclusively for residential use. So theoretically, if in that sliver of industrial space we have, if somebody wanted, like by Amity Truck and Tractor and the used storage facility, if somebody wanted to come in and put a industrial hemp manufacturing facility, they could currently do that.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the cities I work for, Hubbard, we've had a variety of different applications. They've had applications for marijuana retailers, and they require 1,000 foot buffer, not just from schools, but from each other. And then we've had marijuana producers and distributors. And then we've had several inquiries about industrial hemp, and that's not regulated by OLCC, that's regulated by Department of Ag. And so essentially anywhere they allowed industrial processing in Hubbard, they had to allow the industrial hemp because it's regulated differently. It's not a controlled substance in that regard. So we'll look at those rules to make sure that we're being consistent.
The other thought, if I'm not mistaken, with some of those, and the way this is written is that you may not want a dispensary there, but you don't want to restrict a boutique from selling, say, hemp-made products like paper or bags or clothing or something, or CBD-based soaps or something to that effect, that wouldn't be consumed in that gummies or joints or whatever. So I think that allows a little bit of that separation. So the thought being we could potentially come up with something similar for a marijuana psilocybin process as well. But it is very clear in the measure in the state law that just passed that restrictions cannot be seen legally as a backdoor prohibition against the use. And if you're trying, if you're going to say you're going to allow it, but then you set up such a way that you basically outright prohibited it, that's considered illegal. So you do have to allow for some potential, I guess. And that's kind of a fuzzy line.
Right, so how do we, I guess, I mean, I don't know what your feelings are, or what Steve's feelings are, but I would like to make this as difficult as possible for more drugs to become.
Honestly, I don't really care. I mean, I don't think it's dangerous really, I mean, especially if it's like, I realize the whole therapeutic thing can probably be bypassed pretty easily, we'll find a way to do it, but I don't have a strong opinion on it. I mean, there's no taxes coming in from it, so there's no reason to really push for it, I guess, but.
The other issue of note, and I don't have an answer for it unless Holly may do research with other cities. There's no prohibition. It would still be legal for somebody to consume marijuana and or psilocybin in their own residence. So if they had home health care services and somebody came to their house and provided psilocybin in their house, we can't restrict that in any way, shape, or form. It's just the retail, a facility dedicated to that purpose. So much like before Canna Bros was starting to get built, if somebody wanted to drive up the road to almost where Holworth is in that place and buy whatever they needed and come back here and use it, we couldn't prohibit that either. So there's no way to actually eliminate it completely. It would just be a way to restrict that particular portion of how they can consume it.
Right.
So I mean, I didn't put in for anything like a motion or any vote or anything. It's more kind of if you guys are all comfortable with it, and that includes you, Commissioner Ruyle, well, if all of you are comfortable with kind of this plan, Holly and I and the staff can kind of start hammering together a proposal or two, and then within the next November or December planning commission meeting, we can kind of present you a draft for you to take a look at and edit and comment on and tweak as you see fit.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
I mean, all there really is to determine that, it seems like it's what distance from what particular places that there is.
More or less, and whether you want to include marijuana or just psilocybin, merge them together, knowing you'd have to grandfather in Canna Bros, or just leave the marijuana as it is and then just only do psilocybin, or just kind of what your preference is.
Canna Bros they're here to stay because they found the one spot that was outside of that 1,000-yard, and we thought we had that covered.
True, and so the issue with the reason we brought up marijuana, and Holly, I think, brought this up, and it's a good point. If the school goes away, if the middle school goes away and it relocates, you could also potentially open up the south end of town to dispensaries as well. Unless, as she mentioned, you put in a clause that states dispensaries have to be 1,000 feet from each other, then you could allow that, but I would have to check with Bill Monahan if we did that, are we potentially allowing a monopoly in town, or I don't know. I would have to ask that question. Maybe Holly knows, but we could look at those sort of things. But if you're comfortable with us doing them both together, we could start that process as well.
I don't know if they should be separated together. It's kind of two different animals.
I think they should be different code sections.
I guess, yeah, I'd want to see a proposal and what it looks like. And if there's nothing to vote on, then you got to go ahead and we get it set up, and okay, we'll discuss it when we have a proposal.
There, Holly, correct me if I'm wrong, the code changes would require a public hearing, correct?
Yeah, so you'd probably have a work session and then We'll notify the state when we have a public hearing scheduled, and then do planning commission public hearing and then city council public hearing.
It would be similar to what we did with the signs, when we changed the rules for the signs, just
Okay.
kind of the same process. So if there's no concerns, I'll start that ball rolling.
Okay.
Anything from you, sir? Commissioner Ruyle? Look around.
I agree with that. I'd like to see it restrictive. You can drive around to any major city in Oregon and see how well the legalization of drugs is going. So the more restrictive, the better.
Holly, I'll give you the final word, I guess.
The city council already voted to initiate, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so we'll give it a file number and we'll march out our timeline here. And how engaged do you expect the community to be in these work sessions and public hearings, Mike?
Sorry. Unintentional. I do not know. I think we'll get our first indication when the vote is tallied on November 8th or 9th. We'll probably see what the plan is. My expectation is just by the current schedule, we'll see what the vote tally is, and then that following week we'll have our first probably public hearing and or planning session. So we'll kind of have a feel for what the community wants. I mean, if they basically turn down the prohibition and want it to go as soon as January 1st, we may have less wind in our sails to put in a lot of restrictions. If they give us 2 years as a moratorium, then we might have more room to go more restrictive. That's the best I can come up with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the fastest schedule we can pull off with our 35-day notice to DLCD would be to do a work session in November, planning commission public hearing in December, and then a city council public hearing in January. So we could have a decision potentially by January, but that would be fast. I mean, that assumes that staff nails it on the first try, pretty much.
You're looking,
So the pressure's on, no pressure.
yeah. That's two thumbs and we'll be writing this as this guy, so we might be in trouble, but I'll do the best I can.
One other question in my mind is when you pass a rule, a regulation in your city that affects potentially property values, you have to send a Measure 56 notice. So there's a potential that we have to mail like a postcard or a letter to the commercial and industrial property owners, but we'll take a look at that. I'll talk with Bill Monahan about if that's going to be necessary.
Is that something I'm just curious, is that something we just throw in the water bills and do it that way?
No, we have to have an affidavit of every address that gets mailed to in case anybody tries to say they didn't get notice.
Okay.
But that tends to get more people's attention as well. When you say this has the ability to affect your property values, either good or bad.
Okay.
So just a heads up, there might be that requirement.
Okay. Well, I said I'd give her last word, so that's all I got.
Anything else? Put the order.
Question for Mike. Did you already brief the planning commission about public works?
Oh, our change in public works?
Yeah.
No, actually, thank you. On an unrelated note, and for the good of the order, Gary Mathis, our public works superintendent, resigned, took a job with the city of Sheridan. His last day technically was today. He gave us our 2-week notice. So we will be without a public works superintendent for the foreseeable future. And we'll begin a hiring process here shortly for a new public works superintendent.
Wow, he's been around a long time.
7 years, I think. If not more. 2 or 3 as a utility worker, and then three or 4 as the superintendent.
So everything gonna keep running smoothly?
Well, you're in capable hands. Honestly, with Chris and Gary, I think we'll be okay. And we have pledges of support from Willamina, Monmouth, Dayton, Sheridan, and Independence to help out if we get in a pickle. So I think we'll be okay if we, something goes wrong, but for the foreseeable future, what this means for the planning commission is if there's a site design review or some sort of application that comes to the planning commission that needs an engineer or public works review, we'll give it to Chris and Gary to take a look at. And if they can't do it, then we'll have to turn that over to Keller, and Keller Associates will have to sub in as basically as the public works official, or we'll have to find a DRC that would be willing to sign off on our behalf, which we're working on right now as well. So it would hopefully be transparent to all of you, but it would be more churn for staff. And did I answer your question, Holly?
Yeah, that's great. And then just a heads up, we will have a public hearing next month for a site development review.
So there will be a commission meeting in November, and if I'm not mistaken, sir, you are applying for the so we may also have a new planning commission.
Okay. It's not a mushroom shop, is it? Okay, anything else? With that, I will adjourn the meeting at 6:55. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, all.